Thank you all for coming. I'd like to welcome Kyle Bowen.
Ready?
Ready? Retired mortician,
Yes.
comedian, storyteller.
Yes, I'm those things. Hello, Abby.
Hello.
A little disclaimer when we get started. I have been sick as a dog this last week with a pulmonary thing, and I've gotten a total of 10 hours sleep without drowning in my own filth. So if I collapse on stage, you'll get an extra bonus. Like, I saw the guy die at the convention, man. It was cool. Anyway, just thought I'd let you know that. I may become incoherent, but it should be entertaining. So we'll see what we can do with it. Okay. Thank you, Abby, for having me, and thank you to everybody at the convention, which has been pretty awesome. You guys enjoyed this?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
what made you decide to be a mortician?
Why did I decide to become a mortician? Job security was the main reason.
That makes sense.
I was a DJ coming out of college. Not what people call a DJ now, but what they call a DJ then, which was a guy on the radio that played records and talked. And I was making $600 a month being a DJ, and everybody wanted my job. There was constantly people who were trying to take my job from me. And I got married and had a kid, and decided this isn't working too well. And a friend of the family was a mortician, and he says, you know, they're always looking for embalmers. So I thought, let's give it a try. So I checked out some embalming schools and ended up going to what was called the Harvard of mortuary colleges, which was the San Francisco College of Mortuary Science, which no longer exists, but the American River College has picked up their program, and apparently there's a picture of me along with the list of every other student that went to San Francisco College there now, which Sissy Martin sent me a copy of the other day. I didn't even know that picture still existed, but she did. With me, like, very young with a bow tie. Really dorky looking. But I got into it, and it's true, you can find work as an embalmer. Nobody wants to do that job. And it's much more fascinating than being a DJ. And you never have to take phone calls from people. They're dead. They don't say a word to you. So that's very nice. I always enjoyed that part of it. You could curse at them all you want to.
Right. So, you don't get no lip. What's your favorite part of being? Like, what was that?
Well,
did you have a favorite
as I was explaining to you earlier, being a mortician is incredibly schizophrenic. In that, it's one of the, you've heard of jobs that you take a shower after work, or there's jobs you take a shower before work. A mortician, you take a shower before work, and then you take a shower after work. Because you are wearing a suit, probably a three-piece suit. You are dealing with clergy, you're dealing with doctors, you're dealing with grieving families, you're as a counselor, you're doing all that suit stuff. And then you take the suit off, put on the smock, and there's the person who has a Y incision in their chest that you have to get elbow deep into their viscera. So you're going to be filthy at that point. And so it's one of those schizophrenic jobs. And the thing of it is, when you are dealing with the family, the clergy, everybody outside of that prep room, that is a human being. That is a person on your table. And it's an important person who has passed away and people loved. But the moment you pass into the other room and put that smock on and put that mask on, it ceases being a person because you will go insane. That becomes a case. And that's all it is when you're in there. And that transition has to happen the moment you go through that door, each and every time. Case, person, case in a second. You have to completely change your mind. Your mind has to go a completely different direction. Because otherwise you're not going to be empathic enough for the family, or you're going to go insane. And by the way, I didn't mention this, but in my career as an embalmer, which I'm retired from now, I undertook over 20,000 dead human bodies. And I have seen pretty much every condition that you can see, and I'm more than willing to talk about the gross stuff if you want to talk about it. I'm more than willing to talk about how movies depict dead bodies. If I know the movie or TV show, I'll tell you. And generally my answer is they must always get it wrong. By the way, a show that got it right, the show that got dead bodies that looked like real dead bodies, was the television show Hannibal. I don't know if you guys saw that show. Every single dead body they had in that show was right. That's what they look like. In fact, most horror films are completely wrong. And every zombie film is so wrong I want to scream at them.
So, have you ever had somebody not be dead?
No. That's actually something people talk about I got this question a lot when I was working. Doesn't sometimes the guy sit up and he's like back to life? Or even if he's not back to life, they just sit up? The answer is no. And if you do not believe me, I can prove to you this does not happen. Lie down on your back on the floor. Bend in the middle. Which will rise, your torso or your legs? Gravity says your legs will rise, not your torso. So that just in and of itself will tell you that never happens. The other thing is, there's nobody alive. One of the things you have to learn in mortuary college is the signs of death. And there are several of them. You might be familiar with some of them, rigor mortis, but that's not definitive, because as I was mentioning earlier, there's also something called algor mortis, which is rigor mortis in somebody who's still alive. Rigor mortis is chemically identical to a cramp, by the way. It is exactly the same thing as caused by sarcolactic acid building up in the muscles, and the reason that muscle hurts in the cramp is because either blood's not getting to it, or blood's not getting out of it, and that sarcolactic acid is building up, and it cramps. And that's what rigor mortis is, the blood's no longer getting there. So if you were to be resurrected after rigor mortis set in, you would wake up screaming, because your entire body would be in cramp. Other ways of telling are body temperature, obviously, heart rate, things like that, if there is a heart rate or not. But the one thing I always said was the definitive this person is dead, is they are on my table, they are dead. That's what I used to say. And I had an instructor in mortuary college, a very, very wise man and great instructor named Hal Porter, who has since passed away. But he was the teacher that I thought was the coolest and the smartest. He once checked to see if there was any administrators nearby at the door, and he came and looked at the class and go, if you ever are embalming a body, and you make an incision, and you cut open the carotid artery, and blood spurts out, embalm quickly. So that's how you know they're dead.
Do you want to talk more about embalming?
I can talk about embalming. There's a couple things I did want to talk about. One thing, actually, media shows decapitation quite often on various shows. Like there's always some badass ninja that's cutting a head off. Somebody that doesn't want their head cut off, who is alive, is almost impossible to cut their head off. It is next to impossible to do. Even in cases where you have them pinned down, and it's like, Henry VIII chopping wives' heads off, even those guys took 6 or 7 whacks to get a head off. And they had a great big battle axe, and that person was tied down. It is near to impossible to do it with human strength. In fact, most decaps I saw were post-mortem, and they were always hack jobs. I actually dealt directly with 6 beheadings. And of that, only one was pre-mortem. One was actually the cause of death. And that was the light rail in San Jose. Guy fell, the light rail hit him, took his head off. That was the cleanest cut I've ever seen. But all the others were really a mess. And one of them, in fact, was actually kind of a famous case in Oakland, was a waterfront commissioner got killed. The guy post-mortem chopped his head off with a buck knife, which was really hacked to pieces. Then he took the head with him and left the body on the wharf in Oakland. And we found the head 8 months later in the woods up in past Tilden Park. And and that was, we actually had to dig his headless body up to put the head in with the body at the gravesite.
What about the guy?
What about the guy? Which one? The dead one or live one?
No,
The guy who took the head, he was captured, but he wouldn't say where the head was. And he's probably still in prison if he's not dead. I'm sure he got life. There's no way he didn't. In fact, he probably would have got the hot shot if California still did that. Because it was a pretty high profile case. You could actually probably Google just the information I've given you and read all about it. But I'm not going to get into details because that's not my job to give you details about cases. I'll tell you, but I won't tell you who. Yeah. That's decap.
Oh, we have a question.
Sure,
Question.
I'll ask a question just for fun.
Sure.
So, and it's funny because, TV, you see the CPR, it's absolutely done horribly wrong.
Yeah.
If you had any one piece of advice for people that are trying to do a realistic dead body, what's the one thing that they get wrong the most? Is there anything that just leaps out at you?
Coloration is a big thing.
Okay.
And actually the way wounds work is really strange to me. And this is not so much dead bodies, although that's part of it. But like some guy's in a fight and he gets cut up, and like the next scene he's got like a cut on his face and it's bleeding a bit, but it's not really. It's like, dude, that thing would be swollen. His eye would be closed. You know, and I understand he's not pretty when you're doing that, but that's what happens when you get cut with a knife in the face, is you're not pretty. That's something that kind of bugs me, not getting it right. And it seems to me you can get it right. And obviously because my thing is bodies, that's the thing I notice the most.
Sure.
But it's wrong every time. Especially, I gotta hate zombie movies. I really hate zombie shows. Do you know why? By the way, speaking of which, some of you may have heard this has been talked about, but I've been talking about this for years. Zombies make no goddamn sense. They don't, because first of all, this is dead flesh. In the summertime, that body ain't there in 2 weeks. That body is falling apart almost immediately. And in the wintertime, that body ain't moving, it's too damn cold. So don't worry about zombies. Even if there's a zombie apocalypse, the worst, you gotta hide for a week, and then you can go do whatever you're doing. Because they ain't gonna fuck with you for long. By the way, I'm sorry, can I cuss?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. I was gonna say,
It's okay by me. Are
yeah,
you okay
good,
with
I can
it?
cuss. You guys are in for a much better show. Okay.
So now you tell stories.
A story. Ooh. Okay. Well, actually, somebody asked me. I don't know if she's here, but somebody asked me about cremation, which was not my main purview, but I dealt with it a lot as a form of disposition as opposed to burial. I did deal with it, even though I didn't work at crematorium myself. And at a few places I worked, there was a crematorium on site. So, and this gets into a slightly different subject, but one of the difficulties you have as a mortician is dealing with incredibly large people. Fat, I'll go ahead and be blunt about it. Which, by the way, the largest I ever dealt with was 1,100 pounds, which was the only time I ever did a removal with a fire department. There was me and 11 firefighters and a canvas, and they had to firefighter cut out a hole in the wall of the house to get him out. And he ended up being buried in 2 graves and brought there on a flatbed truck in a special casket. But anyway, this particular gentleman I'm speaking of in the cremation was about 550 pounds. And he just barely fit into the retort, which is the cremation chamber. And it was brought up to 1,100 degrees. And there are concrete floors, actually things you have to have in a crematory for safety purposes. And there's always a concrete floor, and there's always a gutter there. And one little quick side note on this, fat people burn quicker than skinny people because fat is flammable. We're standing in there, the cremation has just started. It takes a couple hours. It's been going for about 20 minutes. When we both notice light that shouldn't be there coming from the retort. And what's happening is the fat is melting. It's gonna get gross. The fat is melting. It is spilling over the sides of the retort into the gutters. It is flaming. So we had liquid human flaming fat coming in 2 streams down the building and outside. It was actually one of the most spectacular things I've ever seen in my life. Until you think about, ooh, my holy crap, what the hell am I seeing here? You turned into a candle.
Wow.
Yeah, that's cremation. Do you guys want to hear a bit about the cremation process? Sure. Okay. First of all, there's no ashes. What they call ashes are not ashes. Ashes are actually bone chips. When you're done cremating a human, it is a recognizable skeleton within that retort. It's broken up where the marrow's liquefied and exploded the bone, but you can still see a skull, or at least parts of a skull. You can still see recognizable bone. That bone is then put into a grinder, and they grind that bone, and that's what ashes are. Because the one thing in a human that won't burn is calcium, which is what your bones are made out of. And that's what's left after cremation. There's no ashes whatsoever. No, that's cremation.
Wow. That's interesting. So, have you had any weird experiences that, inspired you to write your stories or anything like that?
I don't know if I'll go through the whole thing, but I will tell you, you can look up this story on, if you guys know the show Snap Judgment, it's on NPR. It's a storytelling, it's based out of Oakland, but it's a national show. And it's called Snap Judgment. They do stories. I've done a few stories with them. And one of them, my title of it, by the way, was How the Dead Really Possess You. But they changed it to Graveyard Shift with a fucking hated that title. But anyway, but they didn't use my title, I used their own. But they paid me, so I'm cool. And it's actually a really long story, but I'll try to cut it back a bit here. I was an apprentice embalmer, and I was still actually in mortuary college. And I was the guy that if somebody died at 2 in the morning, I got the call, and I went and got the body and brought it back to the funeral home. That's actually why you, back in those days, had to carry pagers, and nowadays you'd have to have your cell phone out all the time if you're working as an embalmer. But I was the low man on the totem pole. Almost always has to go out and do the removals because they're cheaper. Once you get your license and you're a journeyman embalmer, then become a master embalmer, you're too damn expensive to send you out in the removal. So I got the call to nursing home, and I knew the nursing home. I'd been there before. It's in an urban area. I won't get more specific than that. But it's in an urban area, and it's the nursing home that you don't want to end up in. It was the nasty nursing home. And I got there, and the doors are tied shut so that the inmates can't escape. And I go into it, and I push my gurney, and the staff doesn't give a crap. And it's a horrible, nasty place that stinks of urine and disinfectant and death. And it's finally found the guy in bed 37B, or whatever it was. And there's 4 people in each room. And one of the guys there, whose name was, I think it was Gary, one of the older guys there at the retirement home, he like interrupted me when I was like coming in with my gurney, and he just goes, "He's been screaming for days!" And it scared the crap out of me. And I go, "Yeah." I says, "Yeah, he just kept saying it's eating me alive over and over. And finally he's dead, so thank God." Okay. So I take the body, and he's got a sore on his arm. It looked kind of like a bed sore, but I didn't really know what I was looking at yet because I was still an apprentice. But it was like wet, and it seemed to almost be pulsating, even though it wasn't. It was kind of an illusion, but I knew it was because of the lighting, but it looked just fucking evil. But I wrapped it up without touching it, even with gloved hands, took it back, and that happened to be the night where I had my first solo embalming. You have to do so many with the supervisor on hand, that after you do that many, you're allowed to do it without a supervisor. And so that was the embalming that I was doing the first time. And I did it, and that sore, I swear to God, it looked like it was growing while I was embalming him. And I was done, I finished it. I had like 3 layers of protective gear on, so I'm reasonably safe. But I've seen older embalmers, like just embalm with gloves on, and nothing else. But I was trained to use universal precautions, so you're always pretend every body has every disease. You always make that assumption. And the next day I got home from mortuary college, which is about 2 o'clock, and I started work at 5. But my boss actually met me, and my apartment was in the funeral home. My boss actually met me at my apartment the moment I got home from school, and he asked immediately, did I wear protective gear? And I go, yeah, of course, I wear the whole suit and the mask and everything. And he goes, good. I said, why? He says, necrotizing fasciitis. So guys, everybody know what that is? Flesh-eating bacteria. That entire nursing home, within days or less, was closed down by the health department. And there were more casualties from it. This stuff is incredibly contagious, incredibly nasty, and it killed more people, including, about 2 weeks later at the coroner's office, the guy that screamed at me that he was yelling for days. And that's the true story that scared the bejesus out of me, and that's how the dead possess you.
Wow. Would anybody like to ask some questions after that?
Yes, sir.
Have you ever had anybody come in that had
Go ahead.
any erections like still?
Yeah. Yeah, mostly because of implants. But sometimes, if you get a body of especially a younger male who hasn't been autopsied yet, that you're allowed to embalm, when you pump the embalming fluid in either the carotid artery here or the femoral artery on the inside of the thigh, which is the main places you're going to do it, mostly here on a man. Sometimes not for women because of low-cut dresses. You don't want that scar to show, that incision to show. But if the blood flow is good still in that body, embalming them will give them an erection. That's really only works on younger people, though. And if they died of some kind of heart disease or a clogged artery, something like that, it usually doesn't work. It's not a good alternative for Viagra, though, so I don't recommend it. But depending on if it's her, it might be a better alternative than Viagra, because she doesn't have to, hang out with him afterward. Is there a question in the back?
Yeah, a body that's buried in a traditional way, it's been embalmed and everything. I think when people lose a loved one or somebody dies like that, they just assume that the body's going to be forever in the same condition that it was when you embalmed it.
No.
Okay, that's my question. What is the rate of decay and what actually happens to that body?
There's a multitude of factors involved. The quality of the embalming, the condition of the body when it was embalmed, the temperatures that you're dealing with, the cause of death can make a difference. But let me put it this way, the best embalmers on the planet that, in fact, I would love to study under, but won't let me because I'm American, are the Russian embalmers that embalmed Lenin. They are the best embalmers on the planet by far. He's been dead since 1924, and his body is still on display. These guys are amazing, but in fact, you can actually get the Lenin embalming treatment, and it costs, I think, last I saw, this was a few years ago, I think it's $450,000 for just their treatment, just that embalming, which, an embalming in a funeral home is going to be maybe $200. So, yeah, it's worth it. But I have disinterred bodies that need to be moved or whatever, and that have been embalmed. Never disinterred any that I embalmed, so I may be much better, who knows. But yeah, there's definitely changes, mostly dehydration of the flesh kind of sinking in, kind of that thing you might see, like the kind of papery skin over a skull kind of thing. That's the main difference you see. But it's going to be in better condition than a non-embalmed body, which is going to be liquid and bone in a very short time. Yes?
Would you get embalmed, or are you?
I don't care. If somebody wants to spring for it, fine. Because she has now passed away, I will say this though. When I left the job from my hometown, and I left because I got in a divorce and I wanted to get the hell out of my hometown and move to the Bay Area. When I left there, I told the place I worked that when my mother-in-law dies, I will embalm her for free. She died and I didn't get to embalm her, which I'm kind of sad about, but there you go. Okay. Yes?
You said that you kind of have to go back and forth between being empathetic with the families and then going and
And doing the technical stuff, yes.
do you have any interesting stories about dealing with mourning families?
Well,
Like, is it all really hard and sad, or do you?
no, it's not all hard and sad. For a while, I was the mortician for Yosemite and for Mariposa area. So it was mostly good old boys and tourists and good old boys. And it's funny because that was the one place I worked where I was actually told not to wear a tie because it was the good old boys, and if you wore a tie, they didn't trust you. So I'd take my tie off and I'd kind of maybe put on my flannel and go talk to them. And one guy I had in, he was a good old boy. He was a funny guy, and he was an older guy. He's like probably 70 something. And he was talking because his wife had passed away. And he says, yeah, my wife died. We were having dinner, just eating. And she just fell right over into her mashed potatoes. And I can't really laugh. I'm not allowed to laugh at this point. So, dignified, that's nice. That actually reminded me of another story. You might dig this one. I was also the mortician for the Miwok clan. And the Miwok clan is part of the Iwani tribe. And Yosemite is a Miwok word. And that's where they're at, in that area. And the chief died at his home. And his 3 daughters were there and his wife. And I picked him up, went to the house, picked him up, took him to the funeral home, and they were going to come in the next day to make arrangements. And they came in to make arrangements, and it was in the afternoon. And we went in to look at caskets. And there's one casket, it's called the going home casket. If you know anything about caskets, you've probably seen this. And it's a casket that has a picture of 3 birds flying along and 1 bird turned around flying the other direction. And this chief had had 3 sons predecease him. All of them died violently, by the way. And there used to be 3 hawks that lived near the house. The family had said these are the spirits of their brothers. But that afternoon they came in. And so when they saw this casket, that's the one they immediately selected. And they goes, our father's hawk was there this morning on the day after he died, that evening. So there's now 4 hawk spirits living at their house. Anyway, so some of it is incredibly interesting. And some of it's like situations where a lot of times the grieving is not grieving I loved you, it's grieving you were a son of a bitch. And that can be fun. I'm so glad you're dead. You get this stuff out of it. That's interesting. One of the best funerals I ever conducted was a guy who'd made pre-arrangements. He bought a case of Dom Perignon. So that was ready to go. He had pretty much an unlimited liquor budget that they could buy whatever they wanted. And his only thing, he wanted 2 things. He wanted a toast with the Dom Perignon by everybody, including the kids, over his casket, which they did. And then his instructions were, everybody gets shit-faced. If you can drive home, fuck you. And they did. And that was an amazing funeral. It was pukey as hell, but it was amazing. So yeah, there's obviously some good things that happen.
Any other questions? There you go.
Yes.
So a lot of shows joke around the subject, but has anyone ever tried to approach you for a alone time with the body?
Yeah.
Oh. Wow.
That's actually not that uncommon. That's pretty common. And if you're speaking, are you speaking specifically of necrophilia?
Yes.
Okay, just want to be sure. Let's say the word. Let's not be coy. Yeah. That has happened. I cannot, as a person that's sworn an oath, allow that to happen. I frankly have opinion. My opinion is I don't really give a shit that you're going to do that. But as a person that's sworn an oath, it's like the cop that has to enforce the drug law he doesn't believe in. Let's put it that way. Like most cops really don't give a damn if you smoke marijuana or whatever it happens to be illegal, but that's their job. So they got to do it. And that's kind of what I was with that. I don't really, if you're going to commit a sex crime, necrophilia is the one to commit. Because there's no real victim here. But there is a sacred trust that and I did swear an oath to be an embalmer. And part of that is to maintain that sacred trust. And part of that unspoken, but should be pretty obvious sacred trust, is you don't fuck him. So yeah, I couldn't in conscience ever allow that. There was one place I worked, which I probably shouldn't name it, but I won't. But it's where it was a kind of a factory place. It was a big place in the Bay Area, gigantic place. That's where I embalmed 1,000 cases a year.
Wow.
And we did a total of 6,000 cases a year. But I personally, there were several embalmers. I personally embalmed 1,000 a year. We had one guy there who was one of the underling staff. In fact, they wanted to apprentice him under me, and I refused to because I knew he was a shitheel, and I didn't think he should be an embalmer. So I refused to be his master embalmer. But he got caught stuffing a body. And here's the deal. The company could not admit this. Because if he got caught with this one, every body that came through here in the time that he worked there, that family had a right to sue and could maybe get money.
Wow.
In fact, probably would get money. If you were on the jury, you'd give them money. And so the company couldn't talk about this. So what happened is it was me and 4 other guys turned him in. He was immediately let go, but he was given a settlement, which included a non-disclosure agreement. So he was not allowed to talk about it in exchange for the money. It was a good chunk of money, too. It was 6 figures. And let go. The rest of us were not given any money, but we knew the story, And within 6 months, all of us were gone from there. Usually by just them pushing or us saying, screw it, I'm out of here. Or them actually getting fired. A couple of them got actually fired. But one of the guys, and this is, I only know this secondhand, I did not see this firsthand. One of our drivers used to be a truck driver, cross country. He's a very tough guy. He's a guy that's gotten into real fights and won them. He happened to go visit this gentleman, the necrophiliac, at his place of residence. And apparently he fell down the stairs and had a horrible accident and broke some bones. That's all I know. Okay. I know nothing else, don't ask me. Okay. Yeah.
I would understand it.
Yes.
What would you say is like the most fucked up thing you've seen, just like gore and?
Gore and condition of a body?
Yeah.
There's some fucked up things.
Most of them.
Well,
Or just a collection of, you know, a medley.
yeah, I can give you a couple. When I worked in Japan, I got a guy who got a boat propeller, took his leg off at the hip. That's actually what killed him. Boat propeller, yeah. He fell out of a boat, propeller hit him, took his leg right off at the hip. He was dead before the leg came off. There was a guy who was a deputy sheriff at Mariposa County who was turning state evidence against the sheriff's office, and he had a horrible accident and ended up in the reservoir. And they never found his body until there was a drought. 8 years later, found his body in netting with weights, and his head had been eaten off by crawdads that were living in his chest cavity. Other than that, he was in pretty good shape. Yeah, that was a... Yeah. That was not crawdads we ate, by the way. Although I like crawdads. Let's see. The heartbreaking one. They actually tried to sell this to Snap Judgment. They told me it was too hard. It was a 13-year-old student. He was just, I think, a freshman in high school. And he was on the golfing team of his high school. It was kind of a posh high school in the Bay Area. And there was only like 6 members of the team. And they had gone from some other city in the Bay Area back to the South Bay. And they were in a van. And he was in the middle seat in the van in the second row back, second seat. And there was, the driver missed something or whatever happened. And they ended up driving into a pole. Here comes the death. Be ready. Anyway. And the pole hit him face on. And his face was smashed. His head was smashed. I worked at a smaller place at the time. It was a mom and pop kind of funeral home. And that's the kind of place where I don't just embalm, I also clean the toilets. You know, it's that kind of place where you do everything and vacuum everything else. And the parents said they want to see him. And I'd seen him, and I knew that unless I told them it was him, they wouldn't know it was him. And so I asked my boss, he was on the phone with him, I go, we weren't that busy, thank goodness. And I said, can you give me 2 days? Give me 2 days and permission to fix him up. And they said, he's got the family. I said, yeah, they could come in 2 days to see him. I spent over the next 2 days probably 23 hours putting him back together. And I literally had to take what skin was left off of what was left of his face and get the bone fragments and glue him back together like a jigsaw puzzle, and with super glue. And once the skull was back, then I could use some of the skin to cover back over, then I had to use wax to make it look like the rest of the skin. It took me, as I said, a seriously long amount of time to do this. But the family was able to see him and recognize him, and they had a photo to work from, so I knew what he looked like. And you could do that to scale. Like, for instance, a cheek cert on the photo, it's so many millimeters apart, so it has to be so many millimeters apart in real life. That's how you do that. You do it by grids. And the family was able to see him. I never met that family. They never met me. I may have crossed them on the street without ever knowing them, but I know they got to see and say goodbye to their son, and that was all the thanks I needed. So, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a downer story, but but they got a chance to see him, and that is not a downer.
That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. And they didn't have to see the wreck that he was. Yeah.
Yeah, you know those little Italian girl. She's in like a glass coffin.
Okay.
You ever heard this?
I probably have, but...
She looks like she's like still alive.
Oh, are you talking about... This is like a medieval thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like 400 years.
Yeah,
But
Renaissance.
she still looks.
Yeah, it's... that's... I don't know. I don't actually know why, but I think it's like in the Vatican or someplace
Yeah,
like that.
in Rome.
And some of it's like ceramic, but you can actually still see the flesh and use your teeth, and there's still actually skin on her. I have no idea how they manage that, especially in Italy's climate, which is actually pretty much identical to here. This climate is where we're at now. So I don't know how that was even possible, unless it could be a miracle. Who knows? It's a weird thing to miracleize, though. I mean, there's plenty of things that need miracleizing much more than that. Yeah, I just actually watched a show the other day about the history of Rome, and they had her in that. So yeah, I have seen that.
Did they talk about the miracle of nitrogen?
The miracle of nitrogen. No.
She's in a nitrogen tube.
Okay. Is that what it is?
She started to show signs of decay.
Yeah.
And so they put her to a drier portion
Okay.
of the catacombs, put her in a nitrogen tube, so it's a miracle.
They didn't mention that, by the way. I didn't know that. So thank you.
So thank heavens for nitrogen.
Yeah. It's part of most of our atmosphere, so yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Oh,
Yes.
You had mentioned about the one guy who wanted free alcohol for all his guests and drive home.
Yeah.
What is either one of the most absurd or out there things that you've heard of a request, or what is the limit to the request that the person passes to make?
Well,
Because you did say about the trust.
yeah.
They couldn't do certain things because of that, but what is it? I'm not sure if anybody would say, hey, yeah, that's
There are legal limits to what you can do with a body, and they've actually loosened up since I was active in the business. It used to be there was very limited places you could spread ashes legally, although nobody gave a crap. You're not going to know. It's bone chips. You won't know what it is. Like people, I want to spread his ashes in the mountains. Can't do that. It's illegal. But they do it anyway, and we knew they did it. And it was no big deal. But we couldn't do it because we were legally bound. The weirdest I've heard of, and obviously I was not involved, was one of my favorite writers, which you may have heard of, Hunter S. Thompson, was cremated, and Johnny Depp paid for a cannon to be built and have his cremation remains shot into the air out of a cannon. That's the coolest one I've ever heard of. But I obviously wasn't there. I wish they had been. Yeah. This is kind of cool. A guy in his 50s, well, actually, his wife was in her 40s and he was in his 50s. She had a breast job, boob job. And she was incredibly proud of her boobs. But then she had heart disease and died. And she was so proud of her boobs before she died, she asked her husband to have a topless funeral. So that was the one funeral, open casket the entire time, boobs right there.
wow.
Which, hey, why not? That was kind of fun. It was really fun was watching people's reaction. That was the fun part. We had to warn them coming in. Yes.
What advice would you give someone who's thinking of becoming a mortician?
I get this one a lot. 20 years ago, I'd have said, do it. I'm a little more reticent now because society is changing dramatically and has changed over the last 20 years. The thing that makes a mortician work is stability of community. There's always going to have to be somebody that deals with death, but as far as people being licensed, like you can get cremated and not have anybody with any kind of license dealing with it. You can get buried and not have anybody deal with it. But if you want to conduct a funeral, have a viewing and do all of that, that's when you need licensed people. People that have trained, studied, and done apprenticeships and taken tests. And that's where we're going. We're going to basically the minimum wage mortician is what we're moving into. So I was making $30 an hour without trying as a journeyman embalmer. And that was no big deal. And I don't even think anybody's making that now. I think it's gone down a lot since then. So while finding work would be something you should be able to do, the amount of effort you have to put into it may not be worth it. Right now, there's 2 programs in California. One is American River College, one is in Cypress College down near Disneyland. Those are the only 2 in California we can get the mortuary degree. They're both 2-year programs, plus a 2-year apprenticeship, plus a state board, which you have to study for or you will not pass it. In fact, if you do study for it, you probably will not pass it. So that's a big investment. And I don't know that it's worth it anymore. But again, I'm not doing it anymore, so maybe you could find it. Around here, you're not gonna make much money. I think the most I ever got paid around here was 20 bucks an hour, which is good money, but considering the training and experience I had, and I was making, in Japan, hell, they paid me almost 50 an hour. So, yeah, there's different areas, like San Francisco is still a union town, and that area is still a union. So you can make pretty good money there. But in the Valley, not so much. So I would, if it's something you want to do, you feel you need to do, then do it. Don't expect, you can make a living. Whether you can buy a house under the current market, I wouldn't bet on it. But, you know, you gotta do something, and it beats flipping burgers. Yeah.
When you get celebrities in,
Uh-huh.
do you ever get paparazzi trying to break in, take pictures of the dead body?
I never got celebrities as such, but I got family members as celebrities. But I never actually did or actually undertook, even not embalming a famous person. Neil Young's family, the funeral home I worked at was their funeral home, so I buried his grandmother. Danny Glover, I buried his parents. You might know of Jackie Spear. She's a congressman out of the Bay Area. She was one of the people injured at Jonestown, and she's an amazing human being, actually. I buried her husband. Those are, I think, the only famous people I dealt with on that level. But I never actually buried a famous person. So, not that many of them, really. Yes?
Can you talk about differences between like dealing with the dead in the U.S. versus in Japan, like culturally?
Yeah, there's a few differences. Japanese tradition is that the body lies at the house for 3 days. But they didn't have a tradition of embalming. So it got a little ripe after 3 days, especially in the summer. So that's one of the reasons they hired us, people that knew what the hell we were doing, to teach Japanese people how to embalm, so that this would become something that wasn't such an unpleasant experience. So I was the professional gaijin. But I never dealt with the public directly, except for 2 occasions I dealt with the public directly. Mostly I was just in the back room. My face was never shown. But they had, one of their ads was American embalmers. They were very proud of that. So they had American professional experts from America to come do the embalming. And then one time, a very rich family asked to meet me. And I constantly broke social taboos. I never did learn Japanese. I could like curse and ask for beer, and that was all I could do. Which is all you need. And I didn't take my shoes off going into the room, which was an immediate faux pas. And I immediately got in trouble for it. But it's like I did that all the time. But they met me. And the only other time I ever dealt with a family, well, it wasn't directly a family, it was a Yakuza funeral. I embalmed a Yakuza boss. And the prep room in Japan was very much under my purview. This was in Hiroshima. It was like, you do not come into this damn room unless I give you permission. In fact, every prep room I'm in, I am God in that prep room. And you do not come in without my permission, and you show respect when you're in here. So I'm there, and I'm embalming the Yakuza boss. And my boss comes in, who never comes into the prep room. He's like the big boss of the thing. And he's got 2 Yakuza guys coming in. And they got the pompadours, and they got the tats up and down. By the way, I think like 6 reasonably tough guys from the east side of town could take them, by the way. I figured I could. Anyway, they came in and they wanted to watch me embalm, and the boss was afraid of them. So they watched me embalm. And when I was all done, Tipping is not the culture there, by the way, like it is here. In fact, tipping is frowned upon in Japan. When I was done, they handed me the equivalent of $100 tip the moment I was done embalming. And they demanded that I was at the funeral. So, which I never went to the funerals in Japan. And so I was at the funeral and they tipped me again there. So I'm down with the Yakuza. We're cool.
Well, thank you so much for coming and having a talk with us.
We done?
We are all done.
Are you guys going to the after party? Okay,
After party.
I am going to be doing funny stuff at the after party. I'm going to do 5 minutes of funny, crazy stuff. Mark, are you still here? Mark is gone, but Mark, who was in here earlier, is also doing stuff. He's hilarious. Go to the after party. If you don't have a ticket, it's $20. It's going to be off the fucking hook, I promise you. I won't talk about gross stuff, but I won't curse, and I'll be hilarious, I promise you. And thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.